Most of us inherit a story before we ever choose one about family, about home, about what's normal. And in the South, those stories don't just sit quietly, they shape you until one day you stop and ask, this is actually mine. Today on the Retire Southern podcast, I am sitting down with John T. Edge, author of House Us, and having the courage to go back, because sometimes you don't find your life by moving forward. You find it by going back. Rooted in the South, purpose, and built for living. Let's get into it. John, thank you for joining me today on the Retire podcast.
My pleasure, James. Please call me John T. That's what friends and colleagues do.
Well, I'm honored to call you John T. So we're going to go, and you kind of hit the writer right in the face, right at the beginning of the book. Yeah. You come to that scene. You're running barefoot, bursting out of your door into the dark, finding your mother crying in the garden. When you go back there now, what do you feeling in that moment?
Bewilderment and deep bone fright. The funny thing about writing a book, not that any of this part of the book is funny, it gets funny later, but is that while I don't think writing a book, anything therapy is therapy, you do begin to discern some cause and effect in your life. And for me, that scene, mother out the back door of our house as the screen door bangs and my feet hit gravel, I was running. And so much of the life that followed that was me running. As a writer, running up and down the road in search of a story, as a human running away from my past. And the reason I began the book with that scene is it was in many ways the beginning of my running.
So those nights didn't happen once, unfortunately, right? They were
Right.
repeated. So at what point in your childhood did you realize that this, or maybe it wasn't your childhood, what point did you realize this wasn't an episode, but more of a pattern?
I don't think I process that and understand how abnormal that is until much later in my life. And in many ways, uh, I don't do that until I build a family as what a house be. Later in my father's life, moved to Oxford where we live, Oxford, Mississippi. And he lived less than, it was like a mile and a half. He was in our lives. He got to know my wife, really went to love and appreciate her art and her cooking. I mean, this is kind of a spoiler of the book, but less at the end of the book is that my father late in life could quit worrying about me because he saw this ways. I don't recognize the travails and the crazy until I make a life that is that.
Yeah. When you were 8 years old, winter 1971, you
Right.
walked into your parents' bedroom, you find your best friend's brother on the floor. How did that moment start to shape how you saw the world at that age?
I mean, it left me unsteady. I could make no sense of that moment. My brain pulled a cloak over that, him bleeding on my parents' bedroom floor, but I can't remember what comes after that. I don't know if, I don't know if my family, I don't know if we spent the night that night. Did my parents sleep next to the space on the floor where he was out? In later life, you become aware that, oh, if somebody has died in a house, then you don't, that house is somehow, you know, uh, becomes less valuable, becomes seen by some as not a place one wants to live. It's really not about the value. It's about whether somebody would want to live in a house where somebody had died. And I also think about that young man in this book, I try to find his grave, and I think I find it, but I'm not sure because there's no inscription.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm left just confused by all of that,
Yeah.
genuinely confused. Um, and I'm left with this sense that I can probably never know what,
Yeah.
and for something that traumatic that you can't figure out, that you can't ever get to. It's not like a car crash. This car woke a few days later. Like, this is impossible to untether.
Mhm. And that, and there was so much tension, even with the break-ins, in your house was, I think, Chester, with the, constantly breaking
Right.
in, vandalizing your home. What was it? I mean, what did it feel like growing up with that kind of fear of that also occurring constantly?
I mean, I think, for me, mm, I carry a deep-seated fear of guns, and, you know, I've been hunting once, and I don't even know how I did that. My friend John Currents helped me learn how to shoot a shotgun so that we could go quail hunting.
Mm.
That was 20 years ago.
Okay.
Um, and before I started really digging into this, now I don't think I could ever pick up a gun because I've kind of reacquainted myself with the fear of guns. I don't have the resolve to use a gun. I remember when our son Jeff remakes,
Yes.
and there's a scene of violence and guns, and just probably 10 at the time, reaches out to hold my hand because he
Mm.
knows how scared I am and how much violence disturbs me and really, um, un kinda really leaves me, shrinking back from life. I just wanna recoil from it all.
Mhm. So you were a storyteller, from a very young age. You, uh, the home of the birthplace of a Confederate general, and when people would see the historic marker on the drive, they would come up, and you would tell these stories, like they were your own. Looking back at that now, do you feel like you were telling history or a repeated version of something that you had been handed?
Well, in many cases, especially in the South, those are the same thing to a lot of people.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
So the history I knew as a boy was printed on the historical marker, in front of our house. It you read that and you would think Alfred Iverson, Brigadier General in the Confederacy.
Right.
And I was born in 1962, and I was born into the midst of the civil rights movement and
Right.
into the midst of our nation's 100th commemoration of the Civil War, the 100th anniversary of the Civil War. So, coming at me, and one seemingly is settled, that of the Civil War and what the Civil War was about, and who someone like Alfred Iverson was and what his career meant and how we should think about him. Seemingly settled. The Civil War rights movement was still playing out. Um, so as a boy, I accepted those stories. I think I, in some way, depended for a sense of I don't know, a a belief in exceptionalness of my place and my people,
Mhm.
white Southerners. It took me a good while to tear down that, and look behind for the truth.
Hmm. Yeah. So thank you for going back through memories. I know that's probably not easy. But so I'll lighten it up a little bit. So you leave home, you go to the University of Georgia. So you grew up in Clinton. You
Yep,
go to University of Georgia in Athens, and you had just like
I
some of us
did.
when we go to college, you pledged Sigma Nu fraternity, and there was one story in particular, because you guys would always have bands of music, and we all know that when you're at Athens, coming out, tell the story. There's a party going on. There's a band, and Michael Stipe's actually in the corner. filming the band, and I think one of your fraternity brothers roughed him up because he said he looked weird, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, Looking back at that, what is that? Does that make you feel anything about that world you're in? At that time,
I mean, I was caught between 2 worlds in that moment. I booked that band.
right?
Well, no, I didn't book. No, somebody else booked the band, but I love the band. That was Limbo,
Right.
an important band in the of rock music in the South and in the nation. And the two poles, conformity via some of my fraternity brothers who are hyper conservative in their politics and hyper conservative in their ideas about life on this planet, and then this burgeoning idea in me that I wanted to be an open-minded person. I wanted to experience the world. I wanted tolerant of others. I wanted to make a different kind of life. And you know, that one of my fraternity brothers roughs up Michael Stipe. Um, uh, Feels like a moment of reckoning.
Hmm.
Whose side are you on, boy? I'm like,
I'm just curious. Since that moment, however many moons ago, have you ever like crossed paths with Stipe again? Have you ever like reconnected with him in any way, or no?
um, he came to a Southern Foodways Alliance event
Okay.
a couple decades back, and I met him there, but substantive conversation.
Okay.
I for this book I interviewed one old fraternity brother who was in Limbo District, and another fraternity brother who was in Art and Dark, which is another band from that era. And they helped me piece together scene and can help me um, understand what transpired that night.
Hmm. At what point did you pick up the bug sprayer and start your concoction of jungle juice shot, bug
Yeah,
juice?
kamikaze shot, I think.
Okay.
So that was, I mean, it's hard to say when I was a sophomore, or junior, or senior. I was a perpetual. He's about to graduate, and I never was about to graduate. Um, but I had this, this color and you know, the things I don't know, I think I'm best at or um see in a positive light about myself come from my mother. My
Hmm.
mother's maximalism. And to me, that was a max. Like, if we're going to serve kamikazes, let's just put them in a bug sprayer because that's efficient and fun and a fraternity. And you're going to stage a party and you're going to serve kamikaze shots, which is this thing anyway. My thought was, well, let's just go one step, two step, three step further.
Yeah.
And I still think that way. I still think on how to elaborate ideas and make something grander. I just do it with a little more reasonableness now.
Yeah, that was a brilliant. Just envision you running through a party like a Ghostbuster with a pack on your.
Yep,
So
that's it.
perpetual graduate, right? Without a degree, you moved to hot Atlanta. You spent a lot of time going there as a child with your family, and job in corporate sales. So two questions around that: how did you, and how much of that was confidence that that you were betting on no one's going to look too closely to see, like, but how did you land this job?
Um, I landed the job through what would be called the good old boy network. I had a fraternity brother named Bruce Hall who worked for um, Dun and Bradstreet in Atlanta, which
Hmm.
was the first kind of corp. Um, and Bruce vouched for me, three brothers who also worked for that company. And um, I could talk a good line. I could present well.
Hmm.
If we fold um, resumes from that era, we would see what I majored in, but not a degree.
Right, right. So, what was your role in your first job? Tell me a little bit more about that. What would you do?
So my very first job, I worked in a restaurant
Right.
at Guest Quarters Hotel, and um, started as a bus guy, and then in a year I was manager of the dining room. I mean, I loved that world, but I realized that was required, at least for me in that moment, more brawn than brain, and I felt like I wanted to try something new. So this next job was selling a data stream of financial information,
Mhm.
um, to, um, to people who were making credit decisions and loan decisions. This
Okay.
was Dun& Bradstreet I worked for.
Mhm.
A complete departure, but I was selling an intangible. In many ways, I was selling this data stream, not a product, not something you'd put on your desk. Um, and in a lot of ways, I'd been selling an intangible, been selling ideas all the while.
Mhm.
The top of that washpot, I was selling an idea about the
Right.
Confederacy. In my fraternity, I was selling an idea about, well, let's just go up, let's ratchet it up. And in my life now, I work in ideas. In many ways, my whole career begins there naturally.
Hmm. That's interesting. So you're in Atlanta, and you're working, but then that changes everything, right? You go to so what was the catalyst for that? What was the moment you knew you were going?
Well, I was in Atlanta during the period of the I was in Atlanta during the run up to the
The Olympics,
Olympics.
right?
Yeah, and that made a big influence on me. I saw and heard, descending from come to Atlanta and the South and figure it out.
Mhm.
They were reporting in from like Tarp Springs and the sponge divers in Florida. They were reporting in from Gullah and Geechee culture and places on the Georgia and Carolina coast. I realized that there was not in this moment. I realized there was not one South, the South I knew, but there were many South. And I also began to realize in this moment that the narrative I accepted about the Confederacy and about the honor of someone like Alfred Iverson was a fiction. I wanted to go back to school. I'd made enough money in my jobs. I'd made enough money to afford to take a chance and quit my job and sold my house and moved to Oxford, Mississippi, with the idea go back to school, finish my undergraduate degree, and then go get a master's degree.
So you said in the book that you only had to have a 1.8 GPA to
That's right.
enter the Center for the Study
Well,
of
I'm not saying that's what the center required. I'm saying that's
Oh,
what I had.
that's what you had.
So
Okay, sorry.
yeah, I think I was a contingency student, something like
Okay.
that.
But so, I mean, you literally just packed it up and you
Yeah.
went there.
Yeah, I mean, I was single. At that point, I didn't have a girlfriend. I could take a chance. A couple of years before, with friends, I'd gone skydiving. I was pushing myself to step beyond um, the life I was living in Atlanta, which was great. I loved my friends. I loved my neighborhood. I'd bought a house, but I knew I needed to push myself to try something new, to find, as Joseph Campbell would have put it, to find my bliss.
So you used the money that you saved up from working Dun& and Bradstreet to make this pivot. Okay.
Other
So
jobs too. Yeah, yeah, Dun& Bradstreet, but all the jobs that followed.
okay. So what did Oxford give you not found anywhere else initially?
Um, I mean, Oxford gave me a community that trying to figure out what the South was and what my role in the South was. That's what it felt like when I stepped into it. There's square books
Mhm.
right on there where I get a part time job, where authors come in from around the world because they want to be in the hometown of William Faulkner, and
Right.
and there is the Center for the Study of Southern Culture in 1977. And I step into that world with really smart professors and really smart graduate students who don't have the exact same question in their head that I do, but have comparable questions in their head.
Yeah.
So I entered into a conversation when I stepped into Oxford, and I entered into community.
Yeah. Yeah. It really seems like that's where you really started to find your stride. You pitch a story to the Oxford American about working a lucky dog cart in New Orleans. And
Yeah,
as a Orleanian native son, like that's where that struck me. So I just have to know, how did you convince them, to let you do that? And you also have to tell me just more about that experience, like your best story from working that cart on Bourbon Street.
sure. So I mean, when you're a young writer, and I think across a career, yes, it's about how good copy is and the, you know, whether you can write, but it's also whether you can think. Like you're selling an idea, the story, as well as your ability to write it. So I think the reason I got to bring the Oxford American is I had a good idea. There was a book coming out. I wrote that article called "Managing Now." It was by a guy named Jerry Strahan, who wrote a book about managing the people who run the lucky carts. And
Mhm.
they Ignatius referenced Ignatius Riley, the protagonist of the novel Confederacy of Dunces. I pitched to a literary magazine which cares about such things as a Pulitzer Prize winning book, Confederacy of Dunces. And then I had action. I had like, okay, I'm going to work a cart for 3 nights leading up to New Orleans. I mean, leading up to New Year's Eve. So that's a pitch, right?
Mhm.
For a literary magazine. And that's
Solid.
really all I had. I
Yeah.
didn't have a lot of clips. I hadn't written a lot. I got a really amazing edit on that piece from John Jeremiah Sullivan, who is, a really accomplished writer. At that point, he was not long out of the University of the South at Swanee. And the magazine worked hard with me, for me, um, to make that piece better. And I learned so much. And over the next 20 years, I wrote a column for that magazine,
Mhm.
and learned so much. That was like, I didn't really, until I went back and got an MFA, I hadn't taken classes. My writing classes were writing for the Oxford American.
Mm. That's amazing. So, do you have any memory, most interesting moment, work a card, or if you New Orleans because you go often, do you ever
Yeah.
nostalgia eat a Lucky Dog? Just curious.
No, I don't think I've eaten a single one from that since that night. I know too
Good.
much.
Yeah.
Um, um, the thing there are two things that stick with me. One of them, remember his name, made these balsa wood models of Lucky Dog carts and then
Yep.
sold them. And I have that on the bar in our house,
Mhm.
set up on the bar as a reminder of that moment. Um, the other thing I remember is just Alice, the primary vendor with whom I worked. I remember her smile. Um, and I remember her pride in her work, and I remember her pride in taking care of me. She didn't need me to get my ass kicked on that cart,
Right.
and she wasn't going to let anybody come after me. And there was real kindness in her and real joy, and I just, she's such an amazing character. I really came to respect and like her a great deal.
Is she still with us or no?
I do not know. I have not
Um,
kept. I kept in touch with her for a while, but I lost track.
Okay. Yeah. So momentum's building. There, things are happening. Biking range, which I didn't even realize until reading your book, is based out of Mississippi, but they make a donation, and the center for what would eventually become the Southern Foodways Alliance, the Dun and Bradstreet sale, could
Right.
find dollars to make it real. So how did you find those matching dollars? How did you raise that money to make it
I mean, I
happen?
used the skill set I developed in corporate jobs. I didn't, you know, sold corporations on supporting the effort. Corporations like White Lily and Brian Foods and people like that. White Lily at that point was based in Knoxville. Brian Foods
West Point, yeah.
yeah. So, I sold them on being underwriters.
Okay. Wow, that's interesting. So, yeah, so now, I mean, the Southern Foodways Alliance is a thing. You're at the center of the whole thing. So, because I'm just jumping around your book, and I almost feel like I'm doing it a severe injustice, but also there's so many questions I want to ask you. So, the Southern Foodways Alliance is fully rolling. After Hurricane Katrina, you guys step in to help reopen Willie Mae's Scotch House in Tremé. Um, and you go down there with a whole cast of characters, including John Currence you
Mhm.
know, and many others. So, project and how you
Yeah.
guys all came together to help reopen Scotch House.
So in the weeks after Katrina and the levees failed, So many people across the South, across the nation, were looking for a way to contribute. Many of us, myself included, love that city and owe so much to that city and felt like we were going to pay down our debt of pleasure we owed to New Orleans. So how do we help? And, it was a massive problem. And, but here in Willie Mae's Scotch House was a discrete problem, a restaurant that out. And there was a nonprofit conservation network was the name of the group, and they isolated Willie Mays. They were looking for a vernacular building. I believe that's the term they used. A
Hmm.
traditional style building that in a business that they could help revive, and they expertise. They were focused on architecture and the building trades, and so they asked SFA, the Southern Foodways Alliance, which I then directed, to provide the labor. So we then mobilized, and we put out a call for volunteers to fly to New Orleans or drive to New Orleans, and work to part and build back this fried chicken restaurant in the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, Willie Mae's Scotch House. So that became, for a lot of people, a symbol of the rebuild.
Hmm.
And we, the Southern Foodways Alliance, provided the labor.
Yeah. So you guys work together. You get it reopened. Willie Mae, soon after. I mean, she has dementia, and really take over. And so her great granddaughter, you write Carrie, who was studying to be an attorney. She basically, folds back in to help her great grandmother. So how has your relationship with Carrie, evolved from that moment?
Well, I write about this in the book that, I go back to see Carrie,
Hmm.
a decade plus after the anniversary of Katrina and after our work is completed. And, I recognize in my conversations with Carrie that, you know, no one ever asked us to do this work.
Right.
Willie Mae wanted to rebuild her restaurant, but we, as intention volunteers, that ended up setting a path for that devolved school into the restaurant business. Based on what Carrie says to me, restaurant business now, but I know, based on our conversations, that path from her career as she knew it, here she found, wasn't an easy transition.
Right.
And it, returning to talk to Carrie about this many years later, I realized that, you know, good work, good intent, can have unintended consequences. And it, for any of us who wish to do good work, especially in places that are not our own. I live in Mississippi. She lives in New Orleans. We need to ask ourselves hard questions. And, I ask those hard questions on the back of that effort. And, that in the future, I would want to ask those hard questions on the front end.
Yeah. No, and in that same vein, I mean, it's a similar, you in the pot liquor papers, you told the story of Booker Wright at Lusco's in Greenwood, Mississippi. The story about race, power, and the cost to speak honestly in the South, and that story stayed with you before Lusco's closes. You go back down with the owners, the Pinkstons, right, and talk to them.
Right.
So tell us more, like why did you feel the need? What pulled you into that moment?
I mean, I wrecked that, you know, I had been the originator of a lot of inquiry into Lusco's, into Crow Past. Um, I commissioned an oratorio about the right that played Carnegie Hall. Um, I had been the originator of, you would say criticism of Lusco, of its paternalistic past.
Hmm.
And so when Lusco's closed, um, I felt to go see Andy and Karen, the current owners, and acknowledge not the demise of their restaurant. I don't think my work led to the demise of the restaurant, but my work led to, I think, in part, a new way of thinking about that restaurant.
Yeah.
And the story before had been, here's the story of an immigrant family that rises from the ashes, or that rises to run a restaurant that endures. And the story changes in part through my work. And I wanted to acknowledge that to Andy and Karen.
Yeah. I mean, you even say in the book, you can almost feel it when you're reading it. Your heart is thumping in your chest as you're having this conversation.
Yeah.
Walking away from the conversation, did you feel anything was resolved, or like I don't ask you, like how when you left the conversation, was it over, or do you still feel like there's something unresolved there?
Um, I don't know. I think the end of that conversation is what I wrote in the book.
Yeah.
Like, I tried to be as fair as I possibly with that family and with myself.
Hmm.
Um, and To me, that conversation.
Yeah.
I listened to Andy and Karen when I was there that day, speaking with them, and heard that, at least tried to out what they said, what I'd done over time, and then come to some conclusion
Mhm.
in the book itself.
Yeah. So the reckoning, right, in 2020,
Yeah,
was a big year, right? So you win a James Beard Award for your writing,
right?
My Mother's Catfish Stew, and almost in the same breath, after the the conversation with Tundi, you're stepping away from the Southern Foodways Alliance after more, than 20 years. So how on earth do you process going from that kind of high,
Yeah.
to that kind of exit?
I time processing that.
Yeah.
I was, the found out as I'm writing this book, and the thing I find out, you know, through my work today, I'm 5 years now into a new job, Mississippi, that I needed to make a change. I had done what I wanted to do and needed to do with the Southern Foodways Alliance, and it was time for me, um, to step aside and let other people lead.
Hmm.
We talked at the top of this conversation about, those moments in the early 90s when I was jumping out of an airplane and completely changing my life.
Hmm.
There are times I believe in our life need to make a change, a substantive. We don't, and sometimes the change comes for us,
Hmm.
and that's to make it, to take a new path. And for me, that moment in 20, while really, really hard to endure, was the prompt I needed
Hmm.
to get to do the things I'm doing now, and to get to write this book. Quite honestly, I don't think I would have written this book were it not for 20, and I'm thankful for having written this book.
I love what you just said. Sometimes the change finds us. I can certainly relate. So, in the closing chapter, of the book, I want to spend a little bit of time there. Again, not that I want to give away the story or bury the lead, uh, but there are a few lines that really caught my attention. The first one is in reference to your mother. The worst of her is
Yeah,
forever in me. The best is too.
yeah.
When did that realization hit you?
I mean, that's one of the things that you figure out when you really bear down
Mhm.
on what you think about something. I mean, that's what a memoir is requires. If you think about that opening scene of my mother running out of the house with a gun in her hand and me
Mhm.
chasing her, like, if you're going to write a memoir, you've got to tell the toughest things. You've got to share the ugliest. And so, I carried away from this book knowledge that what I had witnessed inside and out my house as a boy was horrific. And that the unsteadiness I felt across time was a result of that. But then I also recognized that who kind of fought his way back from flunking out of college to earn 3 degrees and found a nationally important and build a career as a writer. The kind of that person owes a deep debt to my mother. My mother's great social skills, my mother's want to talk with anyone, my mother's intellectual acuity, my mother's sense of style and beauty, all those things, her.
Yeah.
So the best and worst is in
Yeah.
me. And so long as I came out of this book better appreciating the best of my mother.
Yeah.
Not to look past or ignore the worst. But I think part of our, I don't know, part of the responsibility as we grow older is to figure out what to carry forward and what to leave behind. And I think that's the core of a life in your 60s and 70s. What do you carry forward? And then what do you purposefully leave behind?
Hmm.
That's the whole gig, man.
Man, you should consider a career. You could
I've
be
had
pretty good
enough
at it.
of it.
Uh, one of the moments I loved is you say that recipes are inherited. So you carry with you now
Inheritances. I
inheritances.
think about them as like I don't know if you like a piece of property down in South Alabama, or you inherit your grandmother's silver. You
Mhm.
also inherit recipes.
Yes. So you carry Stu with you through Blair, right? So
Yeah.
she's done an adaptation of that recipe. What does that mean to you?
Um, my wife Blair, she's accepted my family and my story and my mother as part of her own life. She met my mother once.
Hmm.
And she's gotten to know my mother genuinely through this book process, through me telling stories. And um, Blair has learned to love my mother as I've learned to love my mother. And we've done that together. Like Blair's commitment to cook that stew is a way to conjure my mother, to bring
Hmm.
my mother back. Comes from my mother's childhood. And when Blair cooks, she summons that past in our present.
I really want to try this catfish too. I think I might
It's
try
really good.
XUV,
It's
the recipe. I had never
you
heard of it,
beyond
honestly.
it's beyond the significance for me and the narrative it suggests. It's just really good.
Okay. Um, I love this line. You write, Mississippi is hard on a soul, and that is why it feels like home. Just give me a little more color around that.
You know, Mississippi is a place that demands attention and stewardship. Mississippi is a place in need of much. The measures of many different things, access to health care, and income, so many other measures
Hmm.
put Mississippi near the bottom. Um, and yet, Mississippi is home because I accept Mississippi and I love Mississippi. I think our job as humans is to recognize that criticism, well rendered, well intended, is an act of love. A want in a belief place or your people can be better. He, you know, requires that of you. Mr. requires you to be. If you Mississippi is never quiet. Mississippi is always asking.
Yeah.
Who are you, boy? What are you going to do? How are you going
Okay.
to contribute? And that's why I like home. I like
Mhm.
those questions.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have purpose here. And more than anything, I love this place and its people. Broken, yes, not. I don't love Mississippi despite its brokenness. I love it because it's brokenness, because almost every place deep down is broken.
This one obviously hit home with me too, but I want you to give a little more around this. You say twice, after I stepped into conversations about slavery and its aftermaths, I paid a price. Once I went down on principle, the second time I went down on flames. Just give me a little bit on those moments and what they cost you.
Sure. So first one, I did an effort to cultural commemoration of the access to education, University of Mississippi. So when I was a graduate student um, in Southern Studies University, I helped start an effort to erect a sculptural commemoration of that fight for access to education that ended in the riots that accompanied Meredith's admission to our university. And that effort I helped lead, um, and it when I was at loggerheads with the chancellor of our university over what sculpture would be erected, I went down in principle. I went down on principle. Um, and later, in 2020, you know, I went down, I would argue, and I do in the book, based on my want to speak in a moment when I didn't need to speak.
Mhm.
So claims.
I can't say it enough. The book is truly amazing. What to order the book? Listening right now, what is the fastest way for them to get their hands on it?
Well, I mean, you could use Amazon, but you could, that would get you something fast. But if you wait a couple more days, you can get a signed copy from Lemuria Books in Jackson, Mississippi, or if you want a signed and you can get one from Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi, where I live, and I can walk the 4 blocks from our house to there to inscribe it for you. You can get the book I mean, it's
Yeah.
published by Crown. It's widely available. We're in a second printing, thank goodness,
Okay.
and it's getting lots of readers. And I'm so glad the book found you as a reader, James. A lot of this book is about, the story I inherited. I inherited that story from the South. I inherited that story from my family. And the story that I was told inside my house and the story I was told outside my house. And I think what I learned writing this book is that I have across time tried to rewrite that story again and again. And I think that's in many ways what all of us do. Comes back to that idea of inheritance. You inherit things from the place and the people you inherit stories from your family. And then what do you do with them?
Mhm.
How do you interrogate them? Uh, do you do in the world? Um, and I don't mean to be so darn earnest about it, but because, I've got a real playful streak and this has been a serious minded conversation. And I think, there needs to be buoyancy and joy in all of this work too. Um, but I do think it all comes down to that. Like, how do you rewrite the story you were given? It's
Mhm.
the one that was handed down. What do you make of it? That's what I've tried to do in this book and in my life.
Well, that's amazing. Well, John T., this
Thank you.
book is not just about where you came from. You're right. It's about what you do with it, the stories you inherit, the ones you question, the ones you decide to carry forward. So, House of Smoke does not give you easy answers. It does something better, in my opinion. It makes you look at your own story and ask what is true and what is not. And maybe more importantly, what are you going to do about it? So, if something in this conversation has stayed with you, please go read the book because this is one of those stories that does not leave you when you close it. Thank you for following Retire Southern, where we are rooted in the South, driven by purpose, and built for living. Listen, read, and live. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, James.